Hi everyone, welcome to the holiday edition of the Bison video blog. There's no snow outside. We've got some important in for us for the backdrop, and we have a special guest. Mr. Kolpak needed a week off, so we brought in Big E, Eric Peterson, to fill in this week, who's been at almost every playoff game and quite a few games this season, including Minnesota. I appreciate you filling in this week.
No problem. Kolpak cannot take the playoff heat. He's got to take a week off. You know, Kolpak needed the 3 weeks. Forget about the teams. Well, Kolpak needed this week off.
So he'll take a break, but we don't need it as we get set for North Dakota State at Sam Houston State in the FCS championship game on January the 7th. We'll get to plenty of the storylines, in the next couple weeks, but I think the biggest one, at least right now, is tickets. They are going fast. They are gone, according to the NCAA on its website. Both NDSU and Sam Houston have sold out. It's a lot of tickets. You talked to the main ticket broker, at least for the NCAA. What's the latest going on with that right now?
The latest, it's officially sold out to the NCAA. Like you said, both schools have got their allotment of 4,000 tickets. Both have requested more, so the NCAA is assuming those have been spoken for. I talked to Josh Hemingway today in the NDSU ticket office. He said they've gotten around 7,000 requests for their 4,000 tickets. So obviously those are spoken for. So right now the NCAA is in the process of maybe freeing up some more tickets within the stadium, whether that's moving bands to like a temporary seating area. But even at that, it's going to be hundreds of tickets that frees up, and not like thousands of tickets. And anything that's freed up is going to be split between the schools. For example, if 700 tickets are freed up, 350 to NDSU and 350 to Sam Houston State. So they're pretty scarce right now.
It's a tough situation. You had a great photo in the paper on Monday of the championship game last year between Delaware and Eastern Washington, and there are thousands of empty seats, and there's two reasons for that. Those are two teams that don't travel well, two teams that don't have a known fan base, especially in Texas. Now you're dealing with one that is 200 miles from the stadium, and then the second one, the Bison, traveled tremendously well. I can only imagine if Montana had won this game, those are the two most rabid fan bases maybe in all of FCS. There'd be a whole lot of people, and there's going to be a lot of people shut out on January 7th trying to get to this game.
Well, like you said, that not only the fan bases, but the other factor, it's the first time both Sam Houston State and NDSU are playing an FCS title game. So I don't know if I want to use the word novelty, but that's kind of a first for both programs. So you're going to get the fans above and beyond who would go, who would initially go because it's a first-time thing.
It might be played in just too small of a stadium. I mean, that could be the facts of this whole thing. It might be just in too small of a stadium to play the FCS championship game. In the years past, when they had it at home sites, Marshall got 32,000. Now, they took that away because they didn't want the home field advantage when they moved it to Chattanooga, and now this is the second year in Frisco. They'll be there again next year, but they may come. This is a soccer stadium. We have to let the folks out there know this is not a football stadium.
It's a tricky proposition because last year, like you said, there's 13,000 fans. This year's kind of a perfect storm. You talk about a home site. Well, if you played at NDSU, that's 18,000.
Correct.
So that, I mean, there's not many FCS sites that have that 30-plus capacity. I mean, I think most of them are in that 20,000 range. So do you gamble and put it in a 35,000, 40,000 seat, neutral site and have a year where you have 17,000, you have an empty stadium?
Right.
It's a balancing act. You can't change it. Frisco is a set site. It's hard to change course at this point, and you got to kind of go with where the chips are laid at this point.
The bidding goes back open next year for the following championship starting in 2013, but at least for next year's championship, it'll also be in Frisco. We each talked to both head coach Willie Fritz and Craig Bohl about their plans. This is a unique situation, and we'll deal with the 3-week layoff in a second, but each of them are going about it in two totally different ways. Sam Houston, they told us, they sent their players home. They're not going to be back till December the 28th.
Yeah, I talked to head coach Willie Fritz this morning. He said Saturday morning they won their semifinal on Friday night. Said he had a team meeting, kind of tied up the loose ends from their win against Montana, and said he sent his players home. Like you said, coming back the 28th. His philosophy is, he called it paralysis through over-analysis. He didn't want him looking at film and, just looking at it and kind of overthinking yourself. And then, like you said, the flip side is Craig Bohl. He was on a Nebraska staff for 8 years, and he had experience going to bowl games. So he's kind of going to use that bowl game approach that he used while at Nebraska. And he didn't. This week sounds like a light week, but he didn't want to totally send him home because, like you said, he wants to keep him refreshed, wants to keep that edge on, wants to work on some strength and conditioning this week to maybe build that up again, because during the, when you're going week to week, I'm sure you don't have much time to lift weights and do some of that stuff.
And also, it's important for a few guys to get healthy, namely Brock Jensen, and most of the Bison battled through the flu in the win against Georgia Southern. I think it's interesting you mentioned that they're going to give this Sam Houston some time off. This is a squad that is not nearly as physical as the Bison, whereas NDSU could use it a little bit to recharge, but they're also going to practice a little bit this week. I'm interested to see, because this 3-week layoff is a new experience for both squads. Do you think we're going to see rust when we get eventually to January 7?
3 weeks seems long, but in a way it doesn't. Like you said, this week, the Bison are going to practice a few days, but then you got Christmas break, you're off for 4 days.
Yeah.
And like Craig Bowles said, that middle week, that's when you got to get your game plan in. When you get to Frisco, trying to put any game plan stuff in is out the window, because I think Wednesday before the game is when they travel. Yep. I'm sure you have banquets, media responsibilities.
Exactly. Yep.
So maybe you do need 3 weeks, because you need to get that game plan in before you get down there, because once you get down there, it's all a pageantry. And do teams deal with that? Can they stay focused?
It's going to test
That's the
them.
question
Yep.
for both teams. Can you stay focused through 3 weeks of practice and some of the media stuff that's going to be extra than maybe what you had during the regular season?
Now, the Bison-Sam Houston game is obviously big news, and we'll be covering that each and every day. But the biggest game, actually, this week is Thursday night. The Bison men's basketball team traveling to Williams Arena to play Minnesota. It's been a house of horrors at Williams Arena for NDSUE. They've been there 4 times in the last 5 years. They've lost all 4 times, all of them by double digits. One game, neither team scored in the first 6 minutes of the game back in 2006. This has been a tough place to play. Obviously, Minnesota is not the same without Trevor Mbakwe, but this is a Bison team that's basically 2 baskets away from being undefeated at this point.
Yeah, and like Saul said, he brought up, they've struggled there, but he thinks it might be a good thing. There's a lot of young players. To them, this is fresh, it's new. There's a lot of guys who haven't played in that atmosphere, so maybe kind of ignorance is bliss type thing. That they're not going to worry about how they shot, in 07 or 06 past performances. It's kind of new to them. You got a lot of people from Minnesota and the Twin Cities areas like Marshall Bjorklund. Those guys are excited to go back, much like football, and say, hey, we got passed over by some of these teams, and they want to show they're solid college basketball players.
Lawrence Alexander will be the biggest difference for the Bison from the team that went down last year and was in that game late in the first half, down 4 or 6 points, if I remember right, before Minnesota kind of stretched the lead and took over. Trayvon Wright had a really nice game. Marshall Bjorklund did last year at Minnesota. That will be huge. The Bison are trying to piggyback off what the Summit League did this weekend, where South Dakota State went into Washington out of the Pac-12, won by 18. Oral Roberts goes to Xavier, the 8th-ranked team. Now, I know Xavier was without 3 of its guys and its best player after the fight, but they won there by double digits. The Summit League RPI is at 11, the highest it's ever been. This is a high watermark, as Saul Phillips noted it, for the Summit League right now.
Yeah, and that's, it's kind of you play for league pride, and like Saul said, he's glad when he sees South Dakota State beat a Washington. I'm like, well, does that worry you? Because that means that team's pretty good. Yeah. But he's like, if they beat a Washington, their RPI goes up, our strength of schedule goes up, and that gives us the possibility to be ranked higher should a team out of the Summit make the NCAA tournament. So maybe that down the road, that sets you up to maybe win a first-round NCAA game because you're playing against a more evenly matched opponent.
You look at what Oakland did, beat Tennessee at home on a nationally exposed game on ESPNU. The Bison beat Fresno State out of the WAC. That can't be overlooked. And right now, last time I looked at it, the Summit League is ranked higher than the WAC is right now. Now, I'm not going to go out there and say that come March, the Summit League is a 2-bid league, but they are going to play the bracket buster, and they're going to look at that to match up with maybe a Missouri Valley team that'll finally get a chance to come to the BSA, which is what NDSU's been wanting since this whole Division I transition happened.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in the cards, but if they ever are to become a 2-bid league, they got to win those games.
Correct.
They got to win at Washington. They got to beat Xavier's. Oakland gets Tennessee to come there. You got to win that game to show them, hey, this is a solid league, and maybe if all things are equal, maybe a second team might be deserving in some year.
At least getting a better seed. And that's what Greg Campy, the head coach at Oakland, was so mad about last year, is Oakland got seeded 14 after they won at nationally ranked Tennessee and then had to play Texas in the opening round. The Summit League has not gotten higher than a 14 seed each of the last 4 years, and that includes that Bison team that nearly beat Kansas back in 2009.
And how that becomes important, I look at that 12. If you can get to a 12 spot,
that's a winnable game.
That 5-12 game is the game where you see more upsets. You get to that 13, 14, 15 range,
ain't gonna happen.
You're playing some pretty high-powered teams. So to win a game like that, you have to play pretty well.
Normally that 7-10 game, 6-11 matchup, as he's mentioned, 5-12 is where normally the upsets happen in the NCAA tournament. He's heading down along with Jody Norstead from our WDAY 6 sports staff to cover the game between Minnesota and NDSU. We'll be back after the holiday next week to get you ready for the Bison and Sam Houston. Have a happy holidays, everybody, and we'll see you next week.